determine or will weigh on my picks, so keep that in mind, and when my sort of personal preferences do come up, I will discuss those. Anyway, let's get on with it, starting with what I like to call the entry-level GPUs. For those with roughly $100 to spend, you have the choice of either the RX 460 or GTX 1050. For me, the GeForce GTX 1050 2GB seems like the obvious choice here. It was 13% faster at 1080p in our recent benchmark video, and given it costs just 10% more, that gives it a slightly better cost per frame ratio. That said, with such a small margin, you could really go either way. The reason I'm going green here is down to the fact that the GTX 1050 is actually a greener product, consuming less power despite being faster. Also, a big win for me is the fact that in order to extract maximum performance from this graphics card, an external power connector isn't required. Some will no doubt argue that the RX 460 unlock, which boosts performance by roughly 5%, makes it a better buy. Well, in my opinion, it doesn't. Yes, if the unlock does work, you can look forward to up to 5% more performance, but with AMD effectively blocking the unlock with their relive drivers, it just isn't worth the hassle in my opinion. So let's lock in the GTX 1050 and move on. Moving on to what I'm calling the budget mid-range segment, we have a rather open and shut case. For months now, we've been calling the RX 470 the best value mid-range contender, and with AMD's improved relive drivers and Nvidia's unwillingness to drop prices of the GTX 1060 3GB, it remains the value champ. In short, the RX 470 4GB is just 5% slower than the GTX 1060 3GB, while it's priced 15% lower. Meanwhile, the 1050 Ti gets touched up worse than any race car driven by Richard Hammond. It's a complete write-off when looking at the cost per frame ratios. The 1050 Ti is over 30% slower and less than 20% cheaper. For those of you who are wondering, should you buy the 8GB version of the RX 470? Short answer, hell no. That would be a worse decision than the hamster climbing back into another rocket car. Although the RX 470 really isn't a great deal slower than the true mid-range contenders, I know that this is the pick that will interest many of you guys the most. It's probably also the one that will get fanboys scrambling for the dislike button if they don't happen to agree with me. Anyway, not at all concerned with that, let's get to it. Not beating around the bush, the 3GB GTX 1060 gets wiped out by the RX 480 4GB as the Radeon GPU was faster in our latest benchmark session. Meanwhile, the 4GB 480 was just 5% slower than the 8GB model while costing a little over 15% less. Worse still for Nvidia, the 4GB 480 was just 2% slower than the 6GB 1060, despite costing around 20% less. Since day one, we've been recommending the 4GB RX 480 over the more expensive 8GB model, and we're yet to discover a playable scenario where the 8GB model provides better performance. For example, when using our 8GB AMD reference card, which can be limited to a 4GB buffer using a custom BIOS, we found no difference in performance between running the card with a 4GB or 8GB memory buffer. And yes, we also looked at frame time performance. Anyway, if you think that spending the extra money now means that the RX 480 will be future-proofed, then go for it. Either way, I picked the RX 480 as the best value mid-range performance option. For around $400, gamers will run into the GeForce GTX 1070, and for now this graphics card has no real competition. A bit like a polar bear in a petting zoo, it tears everything else to pieces. Of course, you are paying for those pixels to glide over your screen in perfect harmony. You could argue that the Fury X is a worthy alternative, but for roughly the same price there are too many shortcomings for me to recommend that product. I'll have a video on this soon, but for now I feel like the more modern GTX 1070 is where your money is best invested. Moving on to something more extreme, we find the GeForce GTX 1080. Something like this big beefy sucker from Gigabyte, their Extreme Edition card. And there are some that will argue that the 1080 is really just a mid-range GPU with a high-end price due to a lack of competition, and you know, that may be the case. But the truth is a $300 1080, apart from being awesome for gamers, would probably also see AMD go the way of the Dodo faster than the P10 to 100 time. Regardless of your opinion, there is no changing the fact that upon release 8 months ago now, the 1080 smashed it out of the park, delivering 30% more performance than the GTX 980 Ti and Fury X. And if the frame rate performance wasn't impressive enough, the power consumption was sure to blow some socks clean off, as the GTX 1080 consumed no more power than last season's GTX 980, and that there is an incredible leap in efficiency. Having said all that, at a cost of roughly $600 US, the GTX 1080's cost per frame ratio in relation to the mid-range current generation GPUs isn't great. Essentially, you are paying almost 140% more for not quite 70% more performance when compared to the 6GB GTX 1060. Of course, high-end GPUs have always come at a price premium, so this isn't exactly surprising. In any case, if you seek extreme 1440p or even 4K performance, then there really is no better alternative. Hell, right now there is no alternative. So to recap, the picks are as follows: the GeForce GTX 1050 2GB, Radeon RX 474GB, Radeon RX 484GB, GeForce GTX 1070, and the GeForce GTX 1080. That pretty much makes up the A team. I think it's fair to say right now the entry level or mid-range market segment is very competitive, and excluding the GeForce GTX 1050 Ti, there aren't really any poor choices here. As a side note, I should point out that as AMD's previous generation GPUs head out the door, there are some great bargains to be had. Many of you have been pointing to AMD's Radeon Fury, the air-cooled non-X model, and at just shy of $300 US, it does seem like a great buy. That said, the Sapphire Nitro model, which is selling for just under $300 US, is only available in limited quantities, and pricing isn't great everywhere. For example, it's a horrible purchase down under. Anyway, in conclusion, I think it's fair to say it's great seeing such strong competition in the $100 to about $250 price range. And let's really hope AMD can help us out very soon in the high-end market segment. And if it's not too much to ask, bring down those prices just a little bit. And yeah, anyway, if you disagree with some of my picks, or perhaps all of them, let me know in the comments section below. I'm your host, Steve, and I'll catch you on the next one.
You want to buy a funnel cake? You want to buy a funnel cake? This guy's toast.
Hello and welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Why am I talking like this? I don't know, so let's just stop and get on with today's review, which happens to be a review of ASRock's Fatality Z270 Gaming ITX/AC motherboard. Actually, that's the box. Here's the motherboard. I have to admit, I do love mini ITX motherboards designed for high-end hardware. They never seem to disappoint. When it comes to PC building, I'm at my happiest when I'm either building an incredibly large system in something like Thermaltake's the Tower 900, or something small in, say, the Silverstone Raven RVZ02. Maybe it's just me, but I find it very satisfying building a high-end gaming rig in something the size of a shoebox. And I'm not talking NBA player shoebox here either. Anyway, ASRock's new Z270 Mini ITX motherboard looks to be the perfect successor to their already great Z170 version. Upgrades include Thunderbolt 3 support, Intel Optane technology, Creative Sound Blaster Cinema 3 audio, and better Wi-Fi integration. Of course, you still get features such as USB 3.1 and Ultra M.2. All of this is crammed into a board measuring just 17cm by 17cm. As was the case with the previous model, ASRock has gone with a black and red theme, and this is common amongst all their Fatality branded boards. The majority of the board is black, with the exception of the dual DDR4 DIMMs and the heatsinks. Speaking of which, the board is surprisingly heavy for its size, and some of that is down to the fact that the board's VRMs are cooled via a rather thick heatsink, which is connected to a smaller heatsink over the Z170 chipset via a copper heat pipe. For the most part, the board's design and layout is excellent. The power connectors are conveniently placed at the edge of the board, along with the USB 3.0 header and 2 of the 6 SATA 6GB/s ports. There are also 3 4-pin fan headers, all placed at the top of the board for easy access. The CPU socket is reasonably clear, Well, actually, for a small form factor board, there's loads of clearance for those trying to stuff a larger cooler into a mini ITX case. Helping to tidy up the board layout is a new Wi-Fi module. Previously, ASRock went with a mini PCI Wi-Fi card using a Realtek controller, which I felt was a bit of an oversight. Had they used an M.2 card, the upgrade path would have been much broader. Anyway, not making the same mistake twice, we find an Intel dual-bound wireless AC7256 adapter pre-installed. This uses an M.2 2230 card supporting speeds at up to 867 megabits per second, while it also supports Bluetooth 4.0. Flipping the board over reveals an Ultra M.2 port supporting the 2260 and 2280 form factors. M.2 drives using either the SATA or PCIe interface are supported. PCIe Gen 3 models can be fed up to 32 gigabits per second of bandwidth. Please note though, if the M.2 slot is occupied by a SATA type M.2 device, then the first SATA port will be disabled. Finally, as you would expect, NVMe SSDs are supported as boot devices. Back on the front side of the board, you will find a Realtek ALC 1220 codec providing 7.1 channel HD audio. The implementation here does come with a huge list of extra features. Features such as the Nichicon Fine Gold Series audio caps, 120 decibel SNR DAC with differential amplifier, TI NE5532 premium headset amplifier for front panel connectivity supporting 600 ohm headsets, isolated PCB shielding, individual PCB layers for the right and left audio channels, gold audio connectors, and support for Creative Sound Blaster Cinema 3. So that's a pretty impressive audio solution for a mini ITX motherboard. So that pretty much covers all the important features. Let's take a look at that UEFI BIOS. Upon entering the BIOS, the easy mode loads first, and here you can find the basic information and options such as the processor type and frequency, memory related information, and system vitals such as the operating temps, voltages, and fan speeds. For experienced users, it is possible to access the advanced BIOS by hitting F6. Alternatively, for future, you can disable the easy mode and just bypass it entirely. The main BIOS layout is very similar to what we have seen from the Z170 boards featuring a fatality theme. Most of the fun will be had in the OC tweaker menu, though there are some useful things in the advanced and tool menus as well. When it came time to overclock, I jumped into the OC tweaker menu, set the CPU ratio to all core, and then raised the CPU's clock multiplier from 42 to 49. After that, I entered the voltage configuration submenu and set the voltage mode to fixed, and then applied 1.33 volts. After that, it was simply a matter of saving the changes and rebooting the system. Now in Windows, we had a 100% stable overclock of 4.9 GHz on the quad-core Core i7 7700K processor. Not bad for a little ITX motherboard, not bad at all. Finally, I installed the Samsung SSD 960 Pro 1TB in the M.2 port on the underside of the motherboard and ran the AS SSD benchmark. The SSD performed as expected, providing a read throughput of 2.8 GB per second with a write throughput of 2.1 GB per second. As for gaming performance, this little mini ITX motherboard will perform like any other Z270 or 170 motherboard, and that's really true for any 100 series or 200 series motherboard. Actually, that's a good size comparison there for the two boards, if that's in focus and in the shot nicely. Anyway, for a long time now, the chipset and by extension the motherboard haven't really been performance defining bits of kit. Ever since Intel released, I think it was Sandy Bridge back in 2011, all the functions of the North Bridge now reside on the CPU. Things like the memory controller, which used to impact performance, are now all on the CPU. This means unless you're testing multi-GPU performance, benchmarking a motherboard's gaming performance is a bit pointless. The other aspects of the Z270 Gaming ITX that I would have liked to test are the audio and wireless networking. Right now I don't have the correct gear or a database of results to compare with, so this is something I'll have to add down the track. For now though, I think it's pretty clear that this little ASRock motherboard is extremely capable. I had no trouble pushing the Core i7 7700K to a 100% stable overclock of 4.9 GHz, and this matches the best frequency we've been able to achieve with this processor yet. The SSD performance was also very good. I had no trouble getting DDR4 3600 memory to work, and that's the fastest memory I have on hand right now, though ASRock does state that the 4000 MHz stuff works just fine as well. At the time of putting this video together, ASRock's Z270 Gaming ITX is yet to go on sale. The previous Z170 model is selling for $175 US, so I feel like if this one can come in for around that price, then it's going to be great value. Overall, I really do like this motherboard, and I can't think of anything that I don't like or would change. Maybe a second M.2 port on the back would be cool, but I'm possibly being a bit greedy with that one. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm your host Steve, and I'll catch you on the next one.
So today I built a rather unique PC that I don't recommend any of you build. There are a few reasons why. We'll discuss those here shortly.